Our top story this week: California hasn't been promptly investigating complaints against their foster care system like they're supposed to be doing. In Florida, CPS agents are quitting at very high rates, with some child welfare agencies reporting turnover rates as high as 80%. In Connecticut, a child welfare advocate is complaining about the use of restraints at a locked treatment unit for teenage girls. And in Massachusetts, a report finds that the number of kids snatched from their parents is up 13% over the last year. Three powerful child welfare organizations are backing a new plan for federal financing of child welfare, saying that the state should have more flexibility to use funds for family preservation services rather than just foster care programs. In Minnesota, the state launches a review of their entire child protection system after they failed to protect a kid who was killed. In California, the child protective industry gets to brag about a few of the families who got their kids back and trying to make it look like that's what they do. And in Ohio, CPS agents end their 3-week-long strike over wages and go back to snatching kids without signing a new contract. In Australia, the Family Law Council wants the courts to start recognizing multi-parent families, and the Australian child protective industry is using police in riot gear to snatch Aboriginal kids from their homes. In Mississippi, they've taken so many kids that they're going to start raising people's property taxes to pay for them. In Canada, the British Columbia child protective industry is still struggling with a defective computer system that they're using to keep track of kids in the child welfare system. In Alberta, Canada, most of the kids who die while in foster care will still be nameless and faceless because the child protective industry will quietly pursue publication bans under a new law. In Nevada, CPS agents are fearing for their personal safety as 22 of them have already filed claims that they were injured while on the job so far this year. In New York, the city will now have to start tracking foster kids after they age out to see what happens to them. In North Carolina, lawmakers are grilling agency leaders over the mess that they've made of the entire agency. And a new study from the latest issue of Child Development finds that kids from wealthy families are more affected by divorce than our poor kids. In Texas, CPS agents are complaining about all the paperwork that they have to do, which is taking away from their time fucking with families. The state is also trying to push forward with bringing more privately owned child welfare agencies on board, despite the evidence that it's not working. And in Portugal, if you disagree with your kid's doctor's diagnosis, you might get accused of neglect. In England, more than half of parents with disabled kids are admitting to taking antidepressants due to the stress caused by a lack of available services or the fear of being judged. The British child protective industry is trying to recruit social workers from overseas because no good social workers there are willing to lower themselves to British child protection standards. And the British child protective industry has been accused of exploiting a child who was killed in an effort to recruit more social workers. In depth this week, more than a third of the foster kids in the UK are separated from their brothers and sisters, with the numbers being more like 2/3 in some areas, and as high as 80% in Derbyshire, although they do say that they try to keep kids together. Some child advocates are calling this routinely separating siblings in foster care unacceptable, as many of these kids are crying out for their brothers and sisters as well as their parents late at night. In Oklahoma, a former foster kid is criticizing the system, saying that foster kids need to stay in the same school rather than being bounced around. In Arizona, the child protective industry wants $1.2 billion from the feds to cover the cost of the surge of immigrant children being sent to the state. In Connecticut, a 15-year-old girl disappears from her foster home. And in Oklahoma, 2 former foster parents of the year are in court over 47 counts of child abuse. In Connecticut, the trial begins for one of the 2 gay men who stand accused of sexually assaulting the boys they adopted. In Haiti, a man from Maine is being accused of sexually abusing boys at an orphanage that he had founded in Port-au-Prince. In Ohio, a former professor and child welfare expert was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison for child porn. And in Pennsylvania, the NCAA drops their punishments against Penn State University handed down over the Jerry Sandusky sex abuse scandal. In Oregon, the trial begins for a 15-year-old boy who was accused of shooting his foster father and another man on a hunting trip. In South Carolina, a father kills his 5 kids after CPS agents deemed him safe. In Washington, a father is suing the child protective industry for not doing anything to protect his son who died at the hands of an abusive mother and her boyfriend. And in South Dakota, the Justice Department is siding with Native Americans in a class action lawsuit against the child protective industry alleging violations of the Indian Child Welfare Act. In Arizona, a judge rules that a child's refusal to go to counseling can't block the reunification efforts of the real parents. A former homeless mother from Arizona who lost her kids after leaving them in a hot car while while she went to a job interview gets them back. In New Jersey, a mother is fighting to get her name off the child abuse register after it was put there because of her prescribed methadone use. And in Indiana, a father gets busted for threatening people at Child Protective Services. In New York, a real mother was arrested for punching a CPS agent in the face. In New Zealand, a conservative candidate brands family court lawyers as, quote, an almost feral breed of people, end quote. A British social worker was sanctioned over a Facebook comment that she had made about a mother who she was messing with. And finally, tonight in England, a father is jailed after he threw a jug of water at the judge during a child custody hearing. For these stories and all the latest dirt on the child protective industry, visit www.legallykidnapped.com. And until next week, this is Baby LK, over and out.